Welcome. Welcome to a post-auction PUC today. I hope you all got everything you wanted to win. And well, you won everything, you and Robin, so I mean, you know. So we're going to start, Robin's going to come up and make an announcement about next week's congregational budget thingy.
Hi, everyone. It was that $5 pour, and I put in more than 6 tickets, just so you know. All right, so we have next week the town hall meeting, and at the town hall meeting, we're going to learn about the budget and about some other important changes to bylaws and stuff, so we're all prepared for the next year moving forward. So please attend the town hall meeting. We might be outside on the patio, both for our service and for the town hall meeting, depending, because we have the voting here happening next weekend. But please plan to stay a little bit after church to learn about that information and on the patio potentially. And then the congregational meeting for the voting on that information that we'll give you would be on June 26th. So just keep those in mind because we want to do well going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. All right. Well, I hope everybody had fun last night, or many of you were here. I know sort of face is good. I know we raised over $10,000, which is excellent. It's great. So let's see. We have the town hall stuff next week. There is our third of our eco-justice Saturday morning adult ed programs is going to be this coming Saturday, and Rachel Brunke and I are going to do a piece on like the emerging memorialization and green death, essentially, and how we need to like reclaim that and make that industry a little greener. So we're going to talk about that. I've organized sort of an impromptu, it's going to be in the newsletter if you haven't seen it, but we haven't talked about it, and that's the possibility of watching fireworks up here on Sunday night, or whenever the 4th is. What is that, Monday? Monday, right? Monday night. So if you're looking for somewhere to spend the 4th, come on up here and we'll have a glass of wine or not, and we'll watch fireworks from here or whatever we can see. So that's on the docket. There's also a movie on Pride. Our Friday night movie is Pride. It's a story as we sort of head into Pride-themed things. It was a story of these, like the gay and lesbian community supporting union workers in Britain. It's kind of a heartfelt, feel-good story. We're going to see that on Sunday night. Lots going on around here. So I want to thank Carmen for drumming us in. She's going to be here. Have you heard the taiko drums? And she's going to join me in the children's moment, which, anyway, so let's see. Our chalice words come from Bill Schultz, former UUA president. He says, the mission of our faith. He says, this is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands. Still not entirely over the fear, and I've been here 5 years. Politics are kind of weird in the UU faith. On one hand, we hold this deep commitment to tolerance and freedom. Before I start, I want to apologize to Diana and Lisa, who I've asked twice to do children's moments, and then poorly scheduled in my mind the request with the match. So I want to make a public apology to them, because I've done this twice. And I don't know why I did that before, but I am honestly earnest. Well, yeah. Well, when you get your Academy Award, you can leave me out of the speech. So back to this thing. So in politics, we hold this deep commitment to tolerance and freedom, right? It's sort of our thing more than anyone else. And we hold a deep commitment to act on and speak towards our values. That's not that simple to do all the time. And then over cereal at home, we read in the paper or in meetings at church, we bemoan ourselves for being a little bit too complacent as individuals and as a church, which we do all three of those things. And yet, ironically, those three things, thinking we should do more, creating a space of tolerance for everyone to feel comfortable, and acting on our values are our three things. They would be our trinity if we had a trinity. And that respect for holding the diversity of people present, and that sense of liberty, and then extending our values into civil life, there aren't firm rules for that, right? This is why we have principles and not rules. So that balance of liberty and justice is a tough gut call. So Today is never more is that true than on Memorial Day, when we want to honor the sacrifice of the courage of lost soldiers, which is the original intent of the holiday, and all those who've passed who we will remember today. And then also hold firmly that the reason that they die is ridiculous and we need to end war. So we're going to talk about all of those things today. So, but not before our opening hymn 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Enter, rejoice, and come in. 361. Rejoice and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Away is to the sun. Away is to the sun. If we have any children, I'd like them to come forward. If we have any people who want to support that, come on down too. People in the United States military, have you guys ever heard of taps? Yeah. We're going to hear taps in a minute. sing out our children in that same theme up with our children's moment. Go now in peace. Thank you. Today after church, as we always do on Memorial Day, we're going to have a dedication of the tiles in the back to the people who've passed. We have two tiles today, one for Barbara French, who we've come to know and love in just the last couple of years, longtime member. Kelly's going to show some of their images, and also George Gleghorn, who passed away. George, we're going to, yeah. There he is. George got memorialized at Point Vicente 2 weekends ago, I want to say, and it was, he's probably the most important member the church ever had, truthfully. He was a founder. If there was I don't know, I mean, I wasn't around at the time, but he was one of the founders, I think one of the more important ones, a significant donor throughout the entire life of his family's life here. Barbara is still alive. She's the only remaining founder of the church that's still with us. And George was an amazing, like his resume is, whoa, like you would be incredibly impressed. He's got degrees from 2 California universities. He was the CFO for one of the major, industrial airline space programs. He and his wife largely founded some of the nature conservancy issues around this area, fought for ecological rights, supported this church. Amazing man. And so we think about George and we memorialize his tile. And then there's also Barbara, who we've come to know and love recently. They were longtime members as well. They weren't founders, but they were steady members for years when they lived in the Bay Area and then up in Toronto. And Barbara lost her husband on Christmas Day 2 years ago, maybe, yeah, in 20. And or 19, and then kind of was here grieving with us, and had a major stroke just about five months ago or so. And we think about Barbara and Kelly and Allison, particularly close to her and heartfelt. And then Jim Michaels, who just died. We don't even, so fresh that we don't even have a tile for Jim. And Jim and I are very close. So, anyway, I lived with him for about 1.5 years and stayed close, and he just died just Tuesday. So we're going to have a service for Barbara on the 24th of July at 1:30, my last act as the minister here. And we're going to have a service for Jim on July 2nd in the morning at 11. So we will talk about them more in the past. I'll invite up Steve Schlegel, or Schlegel as I call him, and he's going to read us a somber prayer about war and its costs.
Counting the cost. Here is a simple Memorial Day prayer. We should repeat it every Memorial Day. It is estimated that since the first century, 149 million people have died in war. The last century alone accounted for about 100 million. Let that sit on your heart. In more detail, with a natural focus here in the United States. In our Civil War, 526,332 American soldiers died. From World War I, 116,516 American soldiers died. From World War II, 405,399 American soldiers died. The total soldiers killed in the Great War, 35 million. In the Korean War, 36,913 American soldiers died. From Vietnam, 58,177 American soldiers. Total dead from all sides in that strategic conflict, some 3,434,000. On the agenda for every church should be an ongoing, never-ending commitment to halt the licensed savagery of warfare, to see to it that war, if not completely eliminated, is at least morally crippled to the degree slavery, cannibalism, human sacrifice, and apartheid are. That is our prayer and should be every Memorial Day. Amen.
In Flanders Field is one of history's most famous wartime poems, written in 1915 during the First World War by Canadian officer and surgeon John McCrae. It helped popularize the red poppy as a symbol of remembrance. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field.
Read with the poignancy it deserves. Thank you, Bob. We readily, as we should, honor lost soldiers here this weekend. It's hard for me not to write the same memorial service every Memorial Day, because I kind of feel the same way about it every year. But it's different. If we're about right, if rough calculations are about right, there are about 1 million American citizens from the start of our country who've lost their lives in war. About 1 million from the time we as a nation officially started. This accounting notably does not include Native Americans who died defending their land, or non-citizen combatants, many African Americans who were not citizens or other mercenary types, but served in military purposes. That is a whole different sermon-worthy topic of itself. I probably need not remind you that it requires a combination of both courage and loyalty to put oneself in harm's way for one's country, like John has, like many people have. Whether the death that one might have in a war is terrifying and quick, or if it's slow and painful, roughly 1 million Americans, mostly men, have had the experience of watching themselves lose the only life we know we are given. It's almost unfathomable to my privileged self that people do this. Maybe you feel the same way. I don't know. That's how I feel. Given the twisted way the world has and is presently structured, we simply don't have the freedom and privilege that we take for granted without that sacrifice being made. We should never forget that. As much as any of us are opposed to war or liberal or whatever you want to call yourself, you should never forget that. As many churches this weekend, I want to start this service with an earnest bow to those who've given their lives in service to their country and to my freedom, the only life we know we have. I both deeply respect that they've done this, and at the same time, I despise the systems and structures in place that have driven them to do it. I believe I've shared with you before that the act that most seared in my mind when it comes to this sacrificial thing, or this bravery that soldiers exhibit, is to jump out of a perfectly good plane in the middle of a night to float down into pitch black enemy territory under gunfire. I don't think I could do that. They'd have to push me out of the plane. Let's take a moment of silence for those people who've lost their lives in the service of the U.S. As you just heard, McCrae closes his famous poem. Bob was reading Flanders Field, speaking for soldiers who've died in battle. He picks up their voice. The poem closes with the request that those listening should pick up the torch from our failing hands and take up our quarrel with the foe, and poetically urges those who fail to do so as having broken faith with those who have died. The last stanza is a strong statement about carrying on. It also begs an interesting question. Do those who die in battle generally feel more loyal to the cause that they die in? Or do they lay dying, cursing the war for having taken their life? Obviously, both experiences have happened, right, to people who've laid dying from a war wound. And it's a powerful question. As disparate as they are, people have had both those experiences, haven't they? Maybe some people have them both almost at the same time. It's kind of how we're cut as humans. We hold these diametrically opposed things together. So I want you to imagine yourself laying on a battlefield or in some makeshift war hospital somewhere, some MASH unit. Would you wish to hand, as much as you can imagine, would you wish to hand the battle to others? Or do you think that lying there, watching life drain out of you, that the futility of war would wash over you? It's a question that most churches, particularly this weekend, would think inappropriate to ask. Not here. Thankfully, none of this room are likely to be faced with that choice. That is the blessing of our moment here. Nearly all of us are too old, and we, if not too old, too privileged to find ourselves at risk of dying in a war. Thank God for that. Although we don't experience it this way, you and I are actually more active participants in the violence of war than we probably like to think we are, and certainly generally think we are. It's simply because our nation is the chief agent of militarizing the world. Without ever putting on a uniform or holding a gun, we simply as citizens, for right and wrong, with good intentions and good ends and bad intentions, selfish, we as citizens of the U.S. are an active part of the violence of the world. I can say that safely because as of 2019, the last results in my sermon search I found, the United States has 800 military installations around the world, 800. Take that in. The first map you're going to see are places that have military bases, U.S. military bases. The bigger of those stars you see, the big pink ones, are countries with at least 50 U.S. military bases in them. Think about all those military bases around the world. Just take that in. The second map I'm going to show you is where we perform military actions between 2018 and 2020. That's where the results ended. The yellow, if you can see it, they're places that we've trained counter-terrorist forces within a country. The green places there, you can sort of make out. It's not the greatest image for this task, but that's a place where we've performed, the U.S. has performed military training operations overseas. And the orange are actual U.S. military boots on the ground engaging with terrorists. This is from the War on Terror. This has nothing to do with the Ukraine. This is pre-Ukraine. The red is where we performed actual air or drone strikes around the world. We're busy. Our actions buy us a lot of power. No doubt prevents some terrorist acts. At the same time, it creates some of the dissent that creates terrorists. Both, right? A lot of both going on today. This is largely unexamined by the American public, who feels making, well, the military feel bad, right? We don't like to make the military feel bad because we know they defend us, and they may be an amazing sacrifice headed their way. I wonder what would make us care more about our global military reach. Very practically, I thought, what could we do to draw our attention towards this? And I thought, popularity of the Hunger Games movies, and recently that streaming hit from South Korea called Squid Game, if you've seen that, led me to wonder if we might draw our attention to the nature and scope of our nation's military reach by combining our fascination with celebrity and what's hot, maybe a little bit of gambling, and maybe some video gaming. Disrespectful to even propose it, but maybe effective. Maybe something like where Americans could wager in a public way on whether Kim Kardashian gets married again before our nation commits, say, 100 more drone strikes. That might drag our attention to that issue. Might the idea of a public lottery based on military actions and celebrity behavior be the gutter experience we people need to put ourselves in a moral conversation with our military reach? In the spirit of trying to break the spell of only respecting the military for the most part, I've dreamed up a couple advertisements that might create some controversy and an interest in removing our blinders to the broader and deeper reality of our militarism. I want you to imagine this released on a future Memorial Day. There's a voiceover. It starts. At this time when we honor the troops and people are receiving tax fund checks, let's take a peek into the government books and see if there's any activity on our collective moral balance sheet. There's a scene where there's two accountants sitting with a bunch of military books, right? And they're being filmed. They look like military bookkeepers. They look like accountants. And there's calculators that say government on them, and maybe there's a laptop open. Voice one says, okay, so far the figures look about right. We're in the war on terror for just over 20 years before we pulled out of Afghanistan, and we lost more than 7,000 of our soldiers. The second voice says, when we run the numbers, and he pauses for a minute, that means that 21-year campaign, about once a day an American soldier was sacrificed to that campaign. And the second voice, the other voice, says, if each state were supplied an equal number of soldiers, which of course they did not, that means that each state would have offered about 7 of their young to this campaign each year. The other voice says, however, remember, as hard as it is to put numbers on the death of our soldiers, when we look at the lives lost in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, the war on terror is significantly under budget of what the American public will stomach, especially if we're going to limit the media access to the caskets coming home as we did in Iraq. The other voice says, how about injuries? Where are we on that, as they look over their books? I don't have the exact data, the person says, but if the estimations on those injured keep pace at a current rate, about 9 serious injuries take place to each fatality. Since the war on terror began about 20 years ago, about 80,000 American troops have been injured. For that 21-year operation, that's not too far from a significant injury every 2 hours or so. The other voice says, affordable to American sensibilities. But remember, the injuries in this war in general are worse than the other wars because more people live and the care is better. More of our troops survive than ever before. How much will that cost us financially, the other voice says. They start scratching out the numbers and punching in the calculations. When we figure in the estimated future costs of medical care and disability benefits, one says, the only appropriate word is wow. A towering 2.2 trillion of the estimated financial cost accounts for the future care that's already been set aside for veterans' benefits. That's about a quarter of the cost of our military expenses over the last 20 years in the war on terror. The other voice says, wow. When we add in the cost of rebuilding the depleted military to those costs and the suffering of our soldiers, on that account, we're talking more than $3 trillion for the Iraq war alone. That's not going to fly. Something has to be done. Voice one says, we could cut benefits. The other voice says, oh, we'll do that. We have shifted some of those costs to nonprofit charitable causes, Wounded Warrior and the such. The other voice says, this is all a compounded real problem because when you figure in the debt interest accumulated because of the war on terror, you start talking at monetary features that are equivalent to the speed of light. The other voice says, true enough, but expenses from the early part of our campaign have dropped. But the start of the Iraq war, we're spending basically $240 million a day. After scratching and tapping on a piece of paper, that means that in the first quarter of the decade of the last big war in Iraq, we were spending about $10 million an hour. Wow, that really gets to the place where your eyes glaze over, the other one says, with just the number of dollars and the number of zeros, where the other voice says, yeah, we're banking on that. You know, $1 million here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon, people's minds just go blank. The other voice says, don't be too heartened, though. Remember, those numbers will not only be divided among the 330 million citizens today, but spread out over future generations. This is reassuring to the other voice who says, well, if that's the case, I think we can afford it. Screen fades to black. The narrator speaks. You wouldn't hand your checkbook over to anyone and let them write your checks, would you? You wouldn't let anyone vote for you. You would certainly want to know who has your car keys and who and how they were driving. To any longer let our government play world cop in our name is not unlike canceling your stolen credit card. End of scene. Here's another little ad I came up with. The second image also appears in the desert in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere. I want you to close your eyes and imagine a camera sort of panning across dusty, war-torn streets. You've seen them on television enough. We hear some gunfire in the distance. In a few seconds, the images of a city change to a place where it sort of emerges into like flat desert. We see a bunch of inspectors, archaeologist types, wandering around, beginning to explore what seems to be a find. It's not explained as to what it is. The groups and individuals are seen from eye level, some scientists, people in lab coats, maybe some military people. They're beginning to explore a find, and they're looking at these white tarps. We initially seems to be a near endless series of large piles about 10 or 12 feet high, about 30 or 40 feet square, like a mound. From the professionals walking around, there's clearly some confusion as to what this is. They're trying to discern what they've discovered. We see the inspectors and academics touch and ponder what might be under these tarps. We hear a few suggest that it might be an ancient mitten pile that archaeologists are in the midst of discovering and working on. We see a professional tour group intent not to step on the chalk lines for violating what they are. They're blocked chalk lines, very much like a baseball field. One of the scientists we overhear suggests that it may be some sort of demarcation. Someone else says it might have some religious significance to it. In the next scene, we hear the roar of a helicopter, and the perspective of the camera and the witness we have watching this starts to rise. It's only from the perspective that we begin to realize that the lines are about 10 square blocks, and what these individual piles we only see some of appear to be a part of a mass sort of flat calendar laid out in the desert. Unseen until we reach a certain perspective from the air is a chalk figure that reads 2006. As the camera hovers ever higher, a voiceover and a subtitle reads, under each of the 365 days of the year of 2006 lie 93 civilian bodies, the average daily cost of the Iraqis killed in 2006 in the war. 34,000 Iraqis died in that war, in that 1 year. In our 21-year war on terror that began after 9/11, we're just at the end of now, seemed like a good summary point to talk about it on Memorial Day. We've killed an estimated 929,000 people in that war. Almost 1 million. That is one American serviceman or contractor lost for every 61 people around the world killed. And the most interesting part of that fact is that we as members of the U.S. are maybe the only country shocked by that. I want you to remember that these advertisements could never be approved to be shown on a network, particularly on Memorial Day. Think about that the next time you see a military advertisement with lean young men or women climbing mountains or morphing into these digital superheroes. Think about the fact that a private person or entity could not get this advertisement, any one of the two just read before, on a major TV network and know that we're not having a real conversation about the cost of war in our country. I'm not saying it's simple. We're in the middle of a conflict with the Ukraine where many of us would believe we should fund the Ukrainians with military war weapons. I'm one of them. I'm not saying we shouldn't have pursued Osama bin Laden or that Saddam Hussein was a good leader. They're dangerous terrorists and thugs in the world, and I'm just asking you to consider that America's one of them too. America spends as much on its military as do the next 11 countries combined. Combined. What I'm asking you to do is look at yourself morally and think about the fact that there are bad actors who need to be restrained, and we're a passive contributor to the largest military empire the world's ever known. Doesn't lead to easy answers. And the fact that we take a side means that we tend to ignore the other side. We have a steady track record of being involved with conflicts that kill so many, cost so much, and never honestly reflect on that. I have an idea to test the conviction of those that lobby the hardest for military big war budgets. What if the military contractors that made up roughly 50% of the military budget and growing only got paid when they successfully completed the nation-building efforts that we pay them so handsomely to participate in? What if, like an investor, any capital venture has to, they had to raise their own capital to fund the wars that they're presently pre-compensated in their performance for with our tax dollars and the lives of our soldiers? Would the private enterprises that we fund take that economic risk for the services and results that we pay them to do? And if not, why not? Let's push that idea even further. What if the military itself was only paid for the successful completion of a task? The nation building we claim to do, or the ending of a conflict somewhere like Afghanistan? That would be unthinkable, right? It would be unthinkable that we would let the military fight for their own suggestions. Why? Do we like paying to be the world cop? Is it just because it might be afraid of admitting that we're just one nation among many? Given the very primitive measure of success that we should hold ourselves to, that we leave the place better and our lives better than when we started our lives, what do we say about Afghanistan and Iraq and our involvement with Syria and Vietnam? the last 4 places we have been involved. In 1961, not Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Abbie Hoffman, but Dwight Eisenhower said in his farewell speech as the President of the United States, acknowledging and even promoting a large military, he said that the councils of government must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. After King won a Nobel Peace Prize and had been the chief leader in the national effort to get civil rights legislation passed, he moved on to and into a Chicago tenement and started to turn his attention towards economic issues that affected the poor. And in that spirit began to speak out against the war and war itself. He opposed it on the grounds that the war on the poor overseas was in part on a war on the poor here, which it is. It might not be a direct war on the poor, but its priorities of where we're spending our money speaks for itself, does it not? On the 4th fridge in our kitchen, there's a magnet with a quote from Thomas Jefferson that reads, "It is in our lives and not in our words that our religion must be read." You can go look at it. It's been living there for a long time. And in that same spirit, Ralph Waldo Emerson said that the gospel you live speaks so loudly people can't hear what you say. So good. What are we doing as a nation? And what is our nation telling the world about us? The terrorists ought to think a lot more about that, and so ought we as well. Religiously, we inherit a morality that has trained us to be more focused on personal behavior than collective responsibility. It is the legacy of the notion that we have a soul and it's going to heaven or hell. We compartmentalize our beliefs and our morality, and we turn away from those fuzzy big things because they're confusing. I'll repeat my call for respect to soldiers. It requires a great combination of courage and loyalty to put yourself in harm's way for your nation. However, as much as we must praise the courage to fight, we must resist the systems that divide us from our oneness around the globe. Amen. Amen. Thanks.
Three friends decided to go hunting together. One was a lawyer, one was a doctor, and the other one was a preacher. As they were walking, along came a big buck. The 3 of them shot at the same time, and the buck dropped immediately. The hunting party rushed to see how big it actually was. Upon reaching the fallen deer, they found that it was dead, but it only had 1 bullet hole. A debate followed concerning whose buck it was. When a game warden came by, he offered to help. A few minutes after that, he had the answer. He said with much confidence, "The pastor shot the buck." The friends were amazed that he could determine so quickly and with so little examination. The game warden smiled. It was easy to figure out who delivered the final blow. The bullet went in one ear and out the other.
Thank you, Darcy. This is our reading from David Horst while we pass the plates. You guys can do that. I'll read while we play, or maybe I'll read first, then you can play. I saw the parade pass with the last soldier marching. I saw politicians stand by, not in pride, but in shame as they recited the names of the dead and admitted their failure. I saw the marching band step in time to silence. No more hymns of glory could they play. I saw mothers and fathers say, "No, I will not sacrifice my child on the altar of the nation's pride." I saw flags no longer madly waved, but held in quiet reverence. I saw granite statues crack and crumble, symbols to the waste of war. I saw the last soldier give his final salute and the trumpeter play taps one last time. I saw the end of brutality and death. I saw the graveyard flags turned to threads by the ceaseless wind. Michael Evans. Yeah. Our closing hymn is Wake Now My Senses, 298, and up on the screen.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving as shows us how. Wake now, my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering and fill the white sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together. It's a weird fate, but that's the best we got. And in spite of time and death, we also believe that in that space between the stars, we pause in silent witness to that vague unity. And after we pause and witness to that unity, we say, may the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom, salam, namaste, and blessed be. And now our service truly begins. Yeah. In about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little more, we're gonna dedicate our tiles in the back. So please don't leave if you want to stay for that. Thanks. Thanks for being here.